Within the womb of divinity, compassion gestates. So let us worship as we live, in the midst of the one which is the love that births compassion, our lover, beloved, and love itself.
Compassion compels us to say yes to the plaintive cries we hear all around us. Compassion also compels us to hear the plaintive cries which rise in ourselves. Let us be still, so that we might hear our own plaintive cries. Let us open ourselves to the stirrings of our souls. Let us trust that even our own longings can be realized in the one in whom our compassion gestates. O divinity in whom we live and move and have our being, hold us, nurture us, challenge us, and birth in us the love our world needs to create shalom. Amen. Sing for joy, you heavens, and exult, O earth. Let mountains break forth into singing. For the tender, loving one has comforted God's people and will mother love God's suffering ones. But Zion said, "The everlasting God has forsaken me. My sovereign has forgotten me." Can a woman forget her nursing child, or mother love for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. Within the womb of divinity, love gestates. Love is nurtured by rakamat, the womb love, which gives birth through compassion. Love twists and turns, prods and kicks as it grows and develops until it is larger than the darkness of despair. Longing for life beyond secure, nurturing walls, love's desire to be with the suffering ones ruptures the membranes, and the waters of life flow forth as compassion moves love into the world, full-bodied love, born in us.
Israel cried patient through her pain. Let your face shine and let us be saved. Tear the heavens wide and stream glory to our eyes. All we claim to know, and all the ways we try to define God are being unraveled, are being unraveled. Prophecy, a sign coming to life. Fig trees bloom alive in mid-July. Temple walls will crack and cave, opening our eyes. All we claim to know, and all the ways we try to define God unravel. Welcome the foreigner. Break down the wall. A child will be born to bring hope to us all. Welcome the foreigner. Break down the walls. A child will be born to bring hope to us all. All we claim to know and all the ways we try to define are being unraveled, are being unraveled, are being unraveled, are being unraveled.
I wanted to talk a little bit today about this unraveling piece. I love the way in which Ben Thomas manages to put that together. And it seems to me that at this time of the year, a lot of the images that we have carried since our childhood are unraveling. But they're also giving way to new images. And so I wanted us to maybe talk a little bit about how we feel about some of the images that we once treasured. And these are images not only about what we imagine divinity to be, but also the images that are conjured in the stories we tell, the stories that are part of our identity. And particularly today, as it's Advent, I'd like to talk a little bit about those nativity stories, and as they unravel into something else, how we manage that in our own lives and in our own person. Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I'll just start a little. My friend did a quilt many years ago, and she just loves the quilt, and it's a divinity scene. And it's very white and very simple, or not simple, very childish, I think. And she wants to put it up, and I don't want to put it up. And then so this discussion going on in my brain, what's important to her and what's important to say. So I put up a old barn-like structure in the outside, just covered in hay with nothing else there.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't yet put up the other banner inside, and I really don't like it. And so I'm in a dilemma over tradition and pleasing certain people, and also getting the message, the new message, as I see it, out.
Thank you. Would you mind saying something about what you don't like about the image that you see in that banner?
Well, the baby is very plump and white, and Mary is very white and pure, and Joseph doesn't have a piece of mud on him, and everything's clean, and it's all perfect.
Mm-hmm.
in a perfect, I know it's like we think of the perfect family, you know, it doesn't exist. So I think that the pure, the unblemished part
Yeah.
is more what I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't put it up yet either. I might do
It's
it.
hard.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, the conversation might begin with why it means so much to this person who treasures it, and that those are difficult conversations to have.
Mm-hmm. But it actually is quite surprising, the reaction. Sometimes you're actually afraid to go to that place, to people that you think you know how they think, and then it all starts unraveling, and you tend to end up in where you never thought you would.
Mm-hmm.
But I have not approached her, but we'll see.
Anyone else struggle with the images that are conjured up by our stories?
The images are okay. It's the interpretation of the images, I suppose. It's is Jesus the Christ, full stop, or is Jesus an archetype that shows us that we are the Christ too? And if we get that dialogue together, I can live with the story. I just can't always live with the interpretation of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Did I tell you the line about no white people in the Bible?
No,
Okay.
I mean, apart from the fact that there were no white people in the Bible, no Christians either.
Yeah, that's the stuff, you know, that I try to get. I said, think about it. There's no white people in the Bible. There's no Christians. I didn't say
No
that, but
Christians.
I'll add that line to you.
One of the things I think that's been helpful for me is telling the stories differently. I mean, if we look at these nativity stories, and let's just narrow it down to the nativity stories, they are parables designed to upset the status quo and to challenge assumptions and to make people think about acting differently in the world. And when we pretty them up, whiten them up, and make them childlike, what we end up doing is telling the story of a Santa-sized divinity, and the word Santa comes from the word Satan. So it's this kind of divinity that we're portraying is really no earthly good, and I mean that in all senses of the word earthly. We have a climate crisis going on. We still have a crisis of violence, and it seems to me that these nativity parables were created at a time of oppression and a need to be liberated from the fears that people were surrounded by. And if we have the ability to tell these stories in that way now, they have the potential to become parables again, and challenge the status quo. And so I'm wondering why we're so reluctant to tell them in ways that will challenge the status quo, challenge carefully held assumptions, and hopefully inspire people to act differently in the world. Any ideas on why we're so reluctant?
Rainey's hand was up a while back.
Okay, Rainey?
Yes, I'm going into the realm of images, and I have come to the place where I can hold. When I was a child, I thought of a child as a child, and think of images that I was raised with in our little nativity scene. But what that brings is a nostalgic feel of family and love. And then I can also go to the image that I've just seen of the Christ child and his parents being in a chain link fence. And not only within that chain link fence is the child in their own fence, and the parents also. Jarring images that need to be balanced out for me, where I can maybe draw back a little towards my childish thinking and then move into it again, to where, because it's so jarring and it's so relevant to see how things are in the present moment. And so having a nice range of, I can't live in the really harshness all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But when I feel the strength, I can move into that. And that's
Mm-hmm.
where I can be more and more.
Mm-hmm.
I think the hesitancy, I'm sorry, the hesitancy, I wanted to address your basically empire question. I think the hesitancy is, at least in America, is our God is our empire. And so when we use the gospel to critique the empire, it's like I mean it's an attack on our religion. Whether nobody would tell us that our religion is Americanism or the Constitution, and the Constitution is the Bible or whatever. But that's basically, I mean, it's the question of, are we Christian Americans or American Christians? You know, what is as a priority? And I'm afraid that our nationalistic, well, or we put our trust in our government more than we put our trust in the story that we're the art form, if you will, of religion, and that's the problem. We're defending our empire religion and ignoring the real religion.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I also think that it goes in sometimes it goes deeper than that. And so this thing that we call nostalgia, it plays in all kinds of ways. Like it plays in Steve's scenario where the empire is America, or the empire is our consumer lifestyle, or the empire is the quest for dollars, the economic system, or the military establishment, or elitism, hierarchical stuff within the academy. All of those things, it nostalgia plays to those as well, because we had dreams and visions of what our place would be within those structures. But there's a nostalgia piece here that happens inside us, I think, which tends to reduce our religion to sentimentality. We follow a rebel, a radical, a terrifying person that I'm sure none of us could have ever lived with. Jesus was annoying. Think about the person Jesus. This is an annoying human being. I know people like this who are constantly going on about the environment or refugees or, changing the government or the economic system, and they're bloody annoying. And I can take them from time to time, but inside me, I'm longing for, Deborah, you talked about the perfect family, which doesn't exist, or this desire for a sense of shalom, right? This peace, which is really wholeness. I mean, the end of that little piece from Ben Thomas, someone flashed on the screen these words about being saved, and I think that one of the things that gets lost in our language is when we Christians hear that word saved, we think, oh, no, I'm not going there. Jesus did not die for my sins. I'm done with that. I moved on from that. And the real Hebrew sense of that word is liberation. Liberation from fear, right? Think of the nativity stories. The message is, do not be afraid. Yeah, the Romans are at the gate. Yeah, they destroyed the temple. Yeah, Jerusalem lies in a heap. And we're terrified. Don't be afraid. A child is going to be born. Life continues. Here's the hope, right? In that refugee camp that you were talking about, Renee, that scene. Yes, we're in a refugee camp. Yes, we've lost our homes. Yes, we don't know where we're going. But here's a child. And here's the hope, right? So it's liberation from fear. It's liberation from the empire. It's liberation from the economic system. It's a sense of shalom. And it seems to me that the Steve, maybe I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but when evolutionary theologians talk about movements in the evolution of humanity, there's almost this sense that as we evolve, we are cooperating more with one another, which is this sense of shalom, this cooperation, this living in peace, and this evolutionary peace. If our religion is not inspiring that kind of evolution within us, think about the reality that the sentimental way in which the nativity story is told has spawned a kind of commercialism that we all sort of go, oh, that's terrible, and buy into some degree, right? Excuse me. Imagine how annoying Jesus would be in conversation with us about our practices around that story. Anyone?
I completely agree with your evolutionary comments, and I think it comes down to, again, we choose which Jesus we want to have in our mind, and the comforting one is the easiest one, and it's the one that the church traditionally has given us, because it's easier to believe in Jesus than it is to follow Jesus. And so that this belief that all is well and all shall be well is delusional in some regards. And I hate to throw that wet blanket on it, but there's got to be a balance here. We can't buy into this, oh, there's babies born and the snow is falling and everything's going to be okay, because we know the end of the story, and the end of the story needs to be interpreted the proper way.
So I would agree with you, except that the comfort is an element in the story, right? The comfort becomes an element. It's within the oppressive culture in which those stories were birthed, is this overriding sense of fear and horror at what life is. And they knew the ending to the story really, really well. There were still rotting corpses all around when these were spawned. Crucifixions were on the uptick when these stories were recorded. And so they knew the ending of the story. They were living the end. They were actually living it. And yet they spawned this hope. And where is the hope? And where will all things shall be well when we, even in the midst of that, we can find human compassion. And it's this essence of compassion that we exercised from our image of divinity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I saw Denise's hand waving, so I want to give you a chance to weigh in here, Denise.
Is it possible that, I want to use the word Holy Spirit, probably love itself, teaches us, helps us to unravel the the perfect nativity story by actions of another person or persons. And in that context, we discover and we know on a deeper level what the story is really all about. So not so much in an academic sense, but in a lived sense. And this is very personal, but that happened to me years ago at Christmas time. And it was dark out. We had all our lights, Christmas lights, beautiful lights. And I was expecting my oldest son at any moment to arrive. And we were just having a good time. So there's a knock at the door. And I said, oh, Ivan's here. Didn't have his key. So I go to the door and open it. And there stands in front of me a young Black man, boy, maybe high school. And he's selling something. And I look at him and I said, no, we don't want any. And then he tried again to sell me something. And I said, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. And his eyes went down. I knew immediately that I was touched by him to learn something so fundamental. But he turned around and he started walking away. And he looked over his shoulder and said very softly, you shouldn't have said you don't belong. And I mean, it's been a lesson in love from a complete stranger whom I rejected. If that isn't what Christmas is all about, the goodness of this young person. Of course, I told the family and they said, Mom, how could you do that? I said, I don't know how could I do that, but I did it. And I tried to find him. The next day, I looked all over for him and I never found him. But I call him the gentle one. And I pray that he is blessed and his family is blessed and his children and his grandchildren. So did my beautiful creche and all of the carols mean anything? not near as much as that encounter. That was the gift that I have received from the one whom I did not recognize as the Christ. And so, yes, to my chagrin and shame and sorrow, this really happened. But I think we learn from each other, and we never know who that other will be that will teach us something so beautiful and fundamental as loving one another and being compassionate. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing that. There's a sense in your telling of your story that it touches us in ways that have the possibility of transformation. We hear your transformation in that story. And it seems to me that the piece that is transforming in your story is this compassion piece, right? You were moved by your own compassion welling up in you. That spirit, as you said, the spirit of or love, whatever, wells up in you, and for me, the image of divinity, especially the divinity that lives within us, is incomplete unless we recognize what our ancestors recognized. There's a Hebrew word, it's ra'achmet, and it means womb, and it gets translated as womb love from the Hebrew, and when it's translated into Latin, it ends up being compassion. Come to be with, and passion to suffer with. And at what I heard in your story was the divinity that lives in you, suffering with the gentle one, who challenged you about his own belonging and the transformation that happens in you. And I think that the way in which we tell our stories has the possibility of transformation, not only in ourselves, but in our listeners, if we can access the compassion, the divinity, the love that lives in us. Yeah. Thank you for that. You know, I hate to do this, but the teacher in me has to do it. The story that you told is a parable because it challenges our assumptions. It challenges us to be. It's a transformative story, and I think recognizing the parables in our lives and learning to tell those parables is a gift we can give to the communities in which we live. So thank you for that, Denise. I think I can sort of speak for all of us. We've just experienced a sacred encounter with the divine in you and the divine in all of us. So Thanks.
and in him.
The young man, you called him the gentle one? That's beautiful. Thank you. As I look at the stories, there's a sense that a story only really is a story if it reads our lives, right? The stories that really peer into our psyche, our being, our souls, and tell us something about ourselves, have the possibility of transformation within a life. And it seems to me that we're missing the mark, which used to be the old definition of sin, right? Missing the mark. I don't believe that's the definition of sin anymore, but it's a linguistic game that we used to play. But we're really missing an opportunity for transformation when we don't boldly tell these stories. And not just the stories of the nativity, it's these stories that our ancestors preserved and told over and over again, and the wisdom and the ability to perceive compassion in these stories. And when I talk about compassion, I'm talking about divinity. It's another word for love. It's loving within the fear, within the suffering, within the turmoil. I'm working on a piece for Sunday about Mary, and telling her story in a way that speaks to the violence of our time, particularly the Magnificat. And how do we tell these stories in ways that facilitate their speaking to our oppression, our fears, with the possibility of transforming the way in which we live. And that's my eternal struggle here. Anyone else want to jump in, Deborah?
Well, I'm just trying to think more of what I didn't like about that particular scene, and I think I can't identify with those images of no conflict or no, it's just, I think that's the issue. It doesn't connect. And which is articulated more here in these conversations. That if you're just praying to a plump little baby, that's not really it.
No. Yeah, and I think the idea that the stories are just childlike little stories is devaluing them in a way that speaks to our abuse of those stories. Because we've whether we've done what Steve's talking about and abused these stories in ways to fortify the empire, which we do all the time, or whether we've used these stories to appease our guilt about our own participation in a consumer culture or a violent culture. Whenever we sentimentalize these stories, we do them and ourselves and the dignity of humanity a disservice, I think.
I would also question the role of nostalgia. That it seems that we use it to serve as comfort, as a nice warm drink when you're feeling cold, or this nostalgia that you sort of go towards against all the things you've learned, because you're suddenly unable to deal with a situation, and the nostalgia doesn't ask anything of you. It just sort of says, well, yeah, that, even if it's inconsistent with where you are now, it's like, I know it's not good, but I need to go here because this is all I can do right now. And then for us to be able to call that out and say, okay, now that I realize that, what is that saying to me that I need to work on? Like, what is that saying that needs attention if that's where I'm going?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me in terms of the imagery of a womb is that you're allowed to rest and grow in the womb. So we're allowed to rest and grow in our nostalgia, in the stories that do provide comfort. But the womb will eventually expel you. It's like, get out of here, go into the world. And I know it's rough out there, but get out there, right? It's like we have to take our rest. As humans, we need rest. As humans, we need to be able to give our being a rest. And sometimes nostalgia is the thing that does that for us. As long as we recognize it as nostalgia and we recognize it as, I'm taking a break here, it's when we begin to worship it that I think the problems begin. Steve?
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit and bring back John Philip Newell. And I think when we look at comfort and whatever, we really want to get in touch with our holy longings that he says the church has kind of pushed us away from, and culture really has pushed us away from. And so we're making ourselves sick because we understand these holy longings are within us, that divinity is within us, but external factors want to suppress that. And so we continue to deceive ourselves sometimes with bad interpretations of stories that will allow a kind of reduce the conflict between the two competing parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree that there's an awful lot for the empire to gain by alienating ourselves from ourselves, right? I mean, Marx talked about that all the time. You know, alienate the worker from themselves and they'll be a good worker. The minute we start, you know, examining our lives, we're no longer really great consumers either, you know, so it's problematic for empire. You can't, you know, what's the first thing an army does? It's alienate their soldier from themselves so that they can become what the army needs, right? And so it seems to me that it's in our storytelling that we can challenge that sort of not just the alienation, but our own laziness in some ways, and our own gluttony when it comes to comfort, right? Like, we really like comfort. I like comfort. I like to be comforted. And there are days when I just want to throw on the Christmas Story movie, and I'm dating myself here, the Christmas Story movie, the original, not the new one, the original, and just go back to a time in the 50s that never existed. It never existed. It certainly never existed in my life. I mean, all of my Christmases as a child were mostly horrific. I mean, if we weren't worried about poverty, we were worried about addiction. And so there was violence in our home at Christmas time because the expectations were so high. So that nostalgia is for something that never existed in the first place, in my case. And so, you know, that pretty little white family in the nativity scene, in our in-person gathering on Sunday, I took our church. I didn't like to go full hog on this because I took our church nativity set, which I couldn't find a made in China thing on it, but I'm pretty sure it was made in China by people who were being oppressed. Now I can do that in our in-person thing because I'm the idiot who bought the nativity set, because we needed one for the children in the congregation, and Costco had one that we could afford, and so I went and bought it. So I was co-opted into the commercial thing. We have this symbol in our sanctuary of all places, and my goal, the reason we didn't have a decent nativity set was I kept waiting for one that had Arabic-looking characters, and couldn't find one. And so even that quest is a quest for some dream or vision of my own. I mean, Francis of Assisi wanted it to be bringing the sky god down to earth when he started using the crèche outdoors and messy, and it had peasants in it, and that's what he was doing for an illiterate culture. And so it's like, what do we create our nativity scenes out of? Well, those images of refugees are a good place to start. What about the violence that may have been perpetrated on Mary? How did she get pregnant? There are lots of clues in the text as to how she got pregnant, and why aren't we telling that story? What about the nativity story that is told in the Quran? Why are we not telling that story? It is a profound story in the Quran. There's a sense that even progressives we have in many ways ignored the story and said it's childish, it has no place here. And our ancestors knew the wisdom of using this story to challenge people, and we've lost that skill. And so it's not going to make us very popular at Christmas time. You know, we'll be as popular as Jesus. You know, think of inviting Jesus. I mean, he was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton, so there may have been moments of his own rest that we might enjoy. But what we know of Jesus, I'm not inviting him for turkey dinner. Like, forget it. He's annoying. He's not going to let me rest with my turkey. He's going to make me take it out and feed it to the poor and the hungry, you know? And this is the sort of the internal dilemma that we all face, right? How do we live a life in the world with joy and compassion? Right? How to create that balance in a life? Steve's waving and Lily's waving.
Can I recommend a book from a Toronto author? Actually, just came out, and I can't remember his name, but the title of the book is J.D. something or other. But the title of the book is "The Day the World Stopped Shopping."
Oh,
and
okay.
he talks about, and there's some, okay, what would happen if we just ignored this whole Christmas economic issue and went further than that and just basically stopped shopping, kind of like we did in COVID, and he uses COVID data to kind of extrapolate some of this stuff, and he gives examples of pockets of communities that have stopped and actually became much slower pace and more simplistic life and whatever. And it's not really religious
It is.
theme here, but it basically tells you that we're on the hamster
Yeah.
wheel, and we're going to be a lot better if we get off of it and quit consuming and look to other things for our happiness.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. The day the world stopped shopping. I got it. Okay. Lily's been waving. Lily?
I have a different story. My son was born Christmas Eve, and he'll be 56. My granddaughter was born Christmas Day, and she'll be 20. So this is part of our Christmas and our birthdays. Our granddaughter always was happy to have it on Christmas Day. She never wanted it any other time. And when Santa said, "What do you like best about Christmas?" she just said, "My birthday." So that is my story for now.
Children are born every day, including Christmas Day, and they do provide us with much hope. Thank you for this. I realize that if we're going to get in the last part of our worship piece here, we need to put an end to our chat. But thank you for this. It has been it's been worship. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen and then I'll come back for the blessing.
Rest well in the womb love of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Rest well so that compassion can be born in, with, through, and beyond you. Peace be with you. Peace.